I was very rigid. I was tense. It was really frightening.
Immersive sports science. Content, not commentary. Sports science, not bro science. I gave this programme a score of all the 8, and here's why. Welcome to Immersive Sports Science, and today we'll be doing a review on a cricket film called The Edge, which is about how Andrew Straus's England cricket team became world number 1 and the mental health problems they faced after becoming world number 1. Due to the nature of the content within The Edge, I'm going to be a little bit more calmer with my delivery due to it being about mental health in certain aspects. Although I'll try to make it entertaining, I will bear the sympathies in mind of those who may be affected. And of course, in the resources areas of the description, you can find a link to the Mind charity if you need help on that kind of thing. It is difficult to watch the programme in a non-biased way, without looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, at what was potentially England's golden test generation.
The thing, I'm not going to miss cricket. I don't think, the playing, the travelling, the practising. But what I'm going to miss the most is batting with Straus, Cook, Peterson and Bell.
Some of the greatest players and greatest people you could ever wish to meet. Thrown into this room and told to go and be the best team in the world.
There's hundreds of wickets I can't remember, but I remember throwing an Xbox controller at Tim Bresnan in Australia.
In terms of the production value, although it was using a lot of B-roll from the past, it was highly cinematic. And in terms of the documentaries I've done, with the exception of Factopia, The Dark Side, this was probably one of the most cinematic documentaries I've ever done. But it certainly was the most artistic as well. The documentary in itself was entertaining and combined the entertainment with the actual knowledge. Although I would have liked more sports science information. It kept the viewers engaged. The artisticness kept the viewers engaged. However, I do wonder at times where some people get a bit carried away with the art side of it. And I wonder, how does that actually help us tell the story? And the story is the most important part of a film. Without a story, it's just random happenings. You have to have a storyline. And yes, that storyline can be manipulated. It's the director's view on what they think is happening well, or their perception of what makes an interesting story. But likewise, are we getting too artistic? We're taking away the message of the story, or are we adding to the story? And this leads me on to the narrator himself. One could also argue there were far too many cliches from this narrator. Yes, it was very entertaining what he said, but quite a lot of it was hyperbolic nonsense, just to keep you engaged.
Imagine your wicket is your bank account. Some batsmen flaunt their wealth. They're fast and loose. They get the drinks in. They put it all on red and buy the whole casino a steak dinner. Other batsmen hear "how's that?" and think, shit, how am I going to pay my mortgage? They're the spendthrifts.
Boycott was 121 not out after batting for 14 hours.
They study the market. They prize their wicket above all else. But they are also the foundation of any great team.
And for me, they were kind of eating up time while not adding to the story, and that kind of diminished to a little bit of an extent the meaning of that story when they could have just kept it a little bit more succinct or utilised something that aided that storyline. Away from the narrator's hyperbolous monologues, the Encyclopedia Britannica B-roll regarding cricket and mental health was beneficial.
He had the makings of a fine player, but he wasn't satisfied with slow, steady improvement. Oh, he expected himself to be perfect right from the start.
Now, for a lot of people, you have to be kind of invested into English cricket to be able to understand this story, to be able to understand, or at least the first half of the story, shall I say, in order to appreciate what's being said and appreciate the journey and the story. It's not necessarily for people who don't understand cricket in itself, which is quite a lot of you guys, especially my American audience.
Now, I know this is a fictitious story, but let's take the example of Space Jam. You don't necessarily need to be a basketball fan. All you have to do is heard of who Michael Jordan was, and you can invest into the storyline given. Bringing this back onto Documentary, ESPN's 30 for 30 Long Gone Summer is an example. You need some prior knowledge or technical knowledge of baseball. However, you can engage in it because the storyline is what sells 30 for 30 Long Gone Summer, and that is very similar to The Edge. The opposite to The Edge would be The Test, which is where the sports science information and the subtleties and the detail of that information is what sells the actual documentary, not necessarily a story, because there isn't really a story there to sell.
But having a room and detailing, if you like, the complex nature of Test cricket, even though there's only 8 teams at the time who were playing it, now there are 12, and then trying to show the complex nature, how do you reach the top, the detail, the personnel, that map, the clock on it, actually helped to explain the difficult road to take in order to become world number 1, in order to hold that mace yet again. It did kind of give the perception, what you find quite a lot in old Roman literature, of a failing side, stereotypically failing, then he comes along, disciplinarian, beats them into shape, and they become the world's best. It's not as easy as that, necessarily.
I didn't need to go to Germany and do push-ups to bat well in Australia.
Shared hardship brings people together. It allows people to respect the effort that their team member had put in right there next to them on their shoulder.
They made themselves seem more human by utilising the natural humour of the individual, especially from Swanee's vlogs.
999! 1,000! You'll notice here, Mr. Mushy's beard is sponsored by Adidas. There's nothing that had happened.
Oh my goodness. This makes them more relatable and therefore allows for investment into the storyline itself.
The one thing that I want to do is get my hands on the actual urn. As he picked it up, I sort of looked in high in reverence at this Ashes trophy and had a little sticker on the bottom. It said Lord Shop, £4.95. I was absolutely devastated. It felt like a fucking boulder.
In terms of the actual national context, many of the athletes were nominated for different awards after this. But failing that in terms of the actual narrative, the one thing they did do was they brought back the sprinkler dance.
Rez, sprinkle!
There are 3 forms of cricket, with Test cricket being considered one of the elite form of the game, although that is highly debatable in the modern era with 2020's importance rising and popularity. We hadn't played well for a very long time. We were the worst ranked Test nation. We were 8th in the world. We hadn't done anything, and beforehand we were going off to places and treating it almost like a holiday, travelling around the world to compete.
Caribbean's not the worst place to go, if I'm honest, as a tourist.
We had a little bit more leeway as a side. There was a lot more alcohol drunk and a lot more good nights out.
These ideas in my head about what the team needed to do to improve, that all sounds great on paper, but then you get to the first Test match in Jamaica.
I think it needs to be done in the head. They're mentally weak in these tough situations.
Well, I suggest whoever the England think tank is at the moment, they tow it out the harbour here and sink it in the deepest channel, because it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous.
Andy Flower was brought in. Now, Andy Flower is from Zimbabwe, and he was highly critical of the government. He was very much a rebel in his own time. He came in and he went to look for some transformational change.
That good, actually. So let's stop pretending we are.
Things needed to change. We needed a plan.
Andy Flower had been a world-class player, the best to ever emerge from Zimbabwe, a fierce competitor, and off the pitch, a principled rebel. Flower used his position to protest against Robert Mugabe and the death of democracy in his country. The stand threatened his career, even his life. But Flower did it anyway, and ended up exiled.
Now, transformational change and transformational leadership is massive in the business literature, and it's becoming more so in sport as well, sport development, sport management, on how you do a top-down focus, holistic approach of the entire structure. Now, that is one way of doing it. The other way is just being a big, strong arsehole and trying to beat everyone down, or try and find the guys who are mentally tough that way round. Either way, you can find more out on transformational change and transformational leadership on these two videos here about the GB system for the 2012 and 2016 Olympics. It weren't good enough just to turn up, you actually had to perform. Don't go partying, you drink too much. Why are you drinking after your performance? You haven't earned that alcohol. You need to have a more professional structure on the way we were performing. We were not being professional enough. This is where Andy Flower got his tough man image from.
He's the scariest bloke you've ever met. He's just got this intensity about him, as if he's looking into your soul.
Andy Flower was quite intimidating as a bloke and as a coach. You didn't want to cross him, you didn't want to mess with it.
Even now, if I pick up my mobile and his name comes up on that, shit, what have I done now?
I didn't really know him from Barris up, to be honest. We were having this chat and he punched me, straight there. So I just went, fuck off, mate, what are you giving it? And he was just like, yeah, I like you, yeah. Anyone else thinking this is weird?
What Flowers wanted was players who were a little bit ostentatious, who were a bunch of Mavericks, who could deal with adversity, who could come back from adversity, who in his mind were mentally tough. Now, Mavericks are great when the whole team is Mavericks. A whole team of Mavericks put together, doing things new. But where it breaks down is when there is no leadership of them, where there is nothing new and they start to question that leadership. The Ashes being a competition between Australia and England, being the oldest competition in world sport. The Ashes came into being in 1882 when England unbelievably lost to the Australians at home in England. A pub landlord then burnt the wicket, ceremoniously put it into a urn, or what then was a perfume bottle, with the words on the actual urn, "Here lies the ashes of English cricket." With the next Ashes being played in Australia, Ivo Bligh had vowed to regain the Ashes. The English media therefore dubbed the tour the Quest to Regain the Ashes, and that's how the Ashes came into being, and it's been a hot rivalry ever since. The Ashes is littered with history, and to many Australians and English people, it is worth a lot more to them than winning a World Cup. Australian cricket culture is one that is quite aggressive. You take it to the batsman, you take the fight to the opposition, and it's come into question about their actual culture quite recently, and they had a review after they cheated in a cricket game. You can see that videos here. And this brings me nicely onto the term sledging. It's basically a form of trash talking, but in cricket, we divide the meaning. You cannot trash talk, but you can sledge. What is sledging? Sledging is basically using banter to unnerve someone, meaning to break down someone's resolve like a sledgehammer to concrete.
And there was this one time in Sydney where a gentleman got an MBE and he didn't really do much to deserve that MBE, and I just let him know that you might want to hand it back. I can lend him some stamps if he wants.
What are you trapping now, mate? You're not getting cleared.
regret the language I used, and I regret the fact that I said it over the stump mic. I don't regret standing up for George Bailey.
Get ready for a broken
You've got to pick someone that's trying to make a name for themselves in the team. They want to actually get into a bit of a scrap or into a fight. If you can put someone off, swearing at them and call them an idiot, sometimes it might be. But most of the time, the sledges, the best ones are the clever ones, or the ones that got a little bit of truth in it that just might hurt a little bit. But I'm very lucky that the more I get sledged, the more it makes me concentrate.
The crowd can also have a massive impact upon your performance. They can lift you up, they effectively act as the 12th man, or they can break you down.
It's as close to a coliseum as you're going to get. You're just thinking, right, we're going out into this cauldron of fire.
Feel the air conditioning disappearing, and you just feel the heat sort of start hitting you, but also the noise.
You walk out, and you know you're going into one of the most intimidating atmospheres in world cricket.
A hostile home crowd can, in effect, break down your resolve. You don't necessarily want to be there. With all the added pressures put onto a cricket player, quite a lot of it's going to come from yourself to perform. And having these external pressures is not necessarily helpful. But you need to block these out. How you do it is up to you. You can engage in the banter, I suppose, if you're standing on the boundary. Situation also dictates what you do and who you do it to. Individual differences are highly important.
I created a quiet sanctuary. Concentration is the absence of irrelevant thought.
All in all, you have to remain calm under pressure. If you're not calm, you will not think straight, and that will affect performance. Plus, if you're tensing your muscles, that will also affect your reaction times, but also how hard or how light you hit the ball. And from the well-being literature, sometimes being in the moment, present in the moment, enjoying the moment, can help with that performance. By keeping us present, it prevents mind wandering, and then therefore that should hopefully make us happy. And when we are happy, we generally perform better, in theory. Yes, I know there are exceptions to the rule, and the Kevin Peterson performance is an example of this. After all, stress is a perception of the reality around you. How you react to that stress is going to be individual to everyone else. How they perceive that stress is going to be different. And how neurologically you react to it will be incredibly different also. Stress, if you like, is a physiological response to allow us to adapt quickly to a certain situation. And it can relate to our anxiety and our arousal levels. Reaching the right arousal will allow, potentially, for the perfect performance. Getting too much arousal will mean you will not perform or are unlikely to perform. That's probably the really simplistic way of explaining it. The same can be said about anxiety. However, we can reframe anxiety and arousal to help our performance or utilise calming techniques. That's why I recommend the use of catastrophe theory as a way of explaining arousal and anxiety. And I'm not going to explain it in this because we'll be here for another half an hour. Arousal and anxiety are not linear responses. They're a multi-dimensional response, and therefore the way we understand it has to be multi-dimensional as well. What we call stress is actually a chemical reaction that happens in the brain, notably the amygdala, which is on constant surveillance for potential threat. The way we analyse threat, we look at the situation and then we pour it into our locus of control, and we decide subconsciously, do I have the skills necessary? Do I have the ability to be able to control or thrive in this situation or not? And then that relays to our actual response. There are two major pathways. The first one ignites our flight, fight, or adapt response. The second response basically is a hormonal response. Our body tries to keep that fight, flight, adapt situation active, or that stress response active, and does this by releasing cortisol. This also has the effect of releasing stored glucose, which in turn gives us more energy. It also suppresses our digestion, immune system, and inflammation to focus our resources on the immediate threat. When the threat disappears, the cortisol levels drop. And the idea is that we then therefore reach homeostasis. And this is for any hormone really. If we do not reach homeostasis afterwards, and it's done over a long period of time, this could potentially lead to a mental health issue. Unlike the one-day games, with summer historically being the time when cricket's played, well, the Northern Hemisphere summer, shall I say. Because cricket's now internationally and global, 2020, the newest form of the game, and one-day series, or the ODIs, the one-day internationals, and one-day cricket itself, has a defined season point, so you can prepare and train yourself for it. In terms of international test cricket, it's pretty much all year round. Test cricket is hard mentally. It's a 5-day match. You have to be tuned in and tune out every day. Your performance is affected by the weather. It's affected by a whole host of things. And you mentally have to be within the game for such a long period of time. If you're so tuned in, living in hotel rooms, not seeing the family over Christmas, playing for 8 months of the year, 9, 10, 11 months of the year, that can be quite mentally draining and fatiguing. Sometimes you just need that escape to escape the world of cricket. The biggest problem with England's test cricket was there was not enough focus on the man and too much focus on the outcome. And if you're outcome driven, that can be quite demoralising. It can be quite demoralising to your well-being if you don't achieve those outcomes. There's certain things you can't control. You can't control how the ball swings. You can't control certain aspects to do with cricket.
No one managed the players. It was just, you have to win. All we care about is you winning. And if you don't win, then we're not going to be happy.
If you're consumed by the game of cricket all the time, when you're away on a tour of that length, you'll drive yourself bonkers.
Test cricket's 90% mental, 10% technical. Some people don't want to show weakness. People fight their own battles behind closed doors sometimes.
Cricket didn't go right for me. I would stay in my room. I did isolate myself. When I have my low moment, I think, oh, I'm looking forward to room service. Everything is there. I would eat everything from it. So I'll just stuff myself with all this sort of unhealthy foods, crisps and the chocolates and the fizzy drinks, and I just sit there and think, oh, this feels great. Actually, I'm all right now. That starts to build up after a while. That's an addiction.
I'd always been resistant really to sports psychologists or people to talk to about that stuff because I felt as though I would learn more from dealing with those problems by myself.
Nobody cared about Finn. All they cared about was frickin' go to the nets and hit that target.
I look back at some of the decisions I made with regret. If I had my time again, I definitely try to work with a person as much as I'd work with a player.
The more positive thing and the healthier thing would have been just get out of your room, just being aware of what your mates and teammates are going through, because on the outside it might look fine, but behind closed doors it's very different.
But one thing you can control is your performance. You can control your mental health to a certain extent. And by not focusing on the controllables, they were allowing their players to break down. They felt lonely. The whole of that England cricket dressing room were feeling exactly the same, but weren't speaking to one another.
It's getting better now where people will talk about it more and say, right, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. Life as a professional sportsman doesn't necessarily lend itself to you being a good person.
And sometimes you just need that one person to speak to help with your well-being. A sportsman only has a very short career. Usually, cricket's slightly longer. Because you're going to end up looking back in it and think, why did I allow myself, or why did the situation dictate to me that? And I allowed it to affect my performance. Rather than enjoying these moments, because not everyone's going to have these moments. And after a while, once they're gone, they're gone. You find with cricket in particular and performance sports, there is a lot of mental health issues, especially around men, for instance. Your identity is your performance, yourself playing. In terms of cricket, and in Test cricket, we don't really have a world championship up until something that's very similar very recently. So if you are a Test cricketer and this is supposedly is the pinnacle of the game, you playing for your country is the pinnacle. Winning the Ashes is the pinnacle. It can become your identity. The white shirts you wear, the red ball you play with. And once that's gone, what exactly are you? If you placed your whole identity around playing Test cricket where there is no definitive end point. A major problem with performance sport is once you reach it, where do you go next? Well, in the case of cricket, you just have to keep yourself at the top of your game in terms of Test cricket. That can be highly problematic because no performance is then suddenly good enough. When do you switch off? You're in your suitcase 8, 10, 11 months of the year. You're in a work environment away from everyone. You have to find how to switch off. And some of the players were trying to play through injury because they wanted to be part of that team identity. We have to be, I can't be bigger than the team. I have to do my part for the team. And this is not helpful at all. Mentally it's not helpful either. Sometimes people need a break. The England cricket team were really rolling off of the old school ideas about psychology. Psychology is a major part of sport, and quite frankly I don't think it's being played significantly enough. Says every other domain of sports science. But I don't think it's considered important enough in sport, in elite sport generally. It's not a weakness to see a psychologist. Yes, it might be seen like that in cricket because someone might utilise that against you in the form of banter or in the form of sledging.
I'm picking up the paper and there's a big double-page interview with Darryl Cullinan about how he's been to see a psychiatrist. He's been playing the man and not the ball, and I'm picking this up and I'm thinking, come on. Now, I'm sure you could come up with something, Michael, about that. So I was just looking around the ground and he was facing up and asking for centre and looking at the umpire, and I just said, what colour was the couch? Half hour, just pay by the hour. And then I walked back and the crowd was into it, and I ended up getting him out stumped, so that was pretty good too.
But it will teach you things like how to control yourself. It will make you a better performance. It's not there just to fix stuff. Although in this situation, seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist would have been helpful for most of the team. Now there's one radical theory that almost all forms of mental health come from one cause. The P factor, they call it. Possibly that might be true. How you can get divergent reactions to different mental health illnesses. This is a highly new way of thinking, and we still don't quite understand if this is even the case.
The Edge is a film directed by Barney Douglas and narrated by Toby Douglas. It follows the England Test team between 2009 and 2013. It is really a film with two halves. The first half follows how they were pulled from the bootstraps by a disciplinarian in the form of Andy Flowers. The second half follows the breakdown of the team and the mental health problems faced by most of them. It was fascinating insight into the personality of a team and the efforts that go into winning, as well as the toll it takes on the mind and body. The documentary was interesting and funny, however, Toby's narrating was cliché and mostly not necessary. So was some of the Encyclopedia Britannica footage. It kind of made up for this with the way the players were explaining their experiences, combined with the highly cinematic and artistic footage. What I would have liked to have seen was more information about the sports science into making a test-winning side. All in all, I give The Edge a score of 88.88.